Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C., in front of the White House today because that's going to kind of play a central role in what we're going to be talking about here. Now, as I'm sure you've been paying attention to, if you've been paying any attention at all to the news, you know that the Secretary of Defense is coming under a little bit of heat these days today because I went a little AWOL, went a little absent without leave by going to a medical procedure at Walter Reed Hospital. Kind of forgot to tell the president of the United States. Now, look, a lot of people are talking about the issues of who did he tell, when did he tell, and all those kinds of things that are kind of embarrassing. But I'm going to talk to you today about something that there's a lot more to this than you may think, and this is actually a lot worse than it appears because ultimately, at the heart of all this is about judgment. What is the judgment of the man, the senior advisor to the president on military matters, the Department of Defense lead, all of that? You've got to have exceptional judgment. And I'm about to paint a picture to you here, really from the beginning of his administration all the way through this incident, it's been pretty bad. And I think it's probably reasonable to suggest we need a new Secretary of Defense. You think that's overburdened? Take a look at this. Now, first of all, let's take a look at this issue here because this is where the first big red flag comes up. Now, from what we understand from the publicly announced information here, Secretary of Defense decided to take a elective procedure of some sort, which still hasn't been fully explained. And so he went to the hospital and transferred authority during the time he was out, apparently, to his deputy. Okay, that's the first red flag. You went to the hospital for an elective procedure, didn't tell the president of the United States. Now, imagine if anything had happened. If the president says, hey, I need to talk to my Secretary of Defense. Oh, yeah, he's kind of tied up. He's in the hospital. Can you try Thursday? Does that work better for you? I mean, that's crazy. Just on its own, that's the first huge red flag there. It gets worse because now his deputy, which is Kathleen Hicks, was on vacation in Puerto Rico. So again, an elective procedure, and you didn't even tell your deputy, and then you transferred authority to her. But, oh, by the way, she didn't know. So for 2 full days, she was not even aware that she was the acting Secretary of Defense. So again, if anything happened, there's nobody in charge. So you got to ask, wow, you didn't tell the president of the United States and you didn't tell your deputy and you let her go overseas to take a vacation when you knew that you were going to be out. So there's a lot of big questions here. Something's not washing. I don't know for sure what's been going on, but there's an issue with leadership and with judgment. Now, when asked earlier today aboard Air Force One, John Kirby was asked about this whole situation and what the president seems to think about it. Now, it's a little hard to hear because he was on Air Force One, but take a listen to what he said.
And I don't know the level of the president's personal knowledge of his medical situation, and that would really be between the two men. I want to make sure I put a fork in my answer to you. There is no plans for anything other than for Secretary Austin to stay in the job and continuing the leadership that he's been demonstrating.
No problem but to leave him in position so he can continue to demonstrate the leadership that he has been. That's your second red flag here. Now, listen, let's go back. This is one thing, but, administrative issues, not telling the president something, not telling your deputy, those are red flags, but it's administrative issues. What is it on important issues, things that actually matter, on strategic matters to the United States related to our national security? Let's go back to the beginning of the administration. In the first one was with the Afghan withdrawal. Now, look, as I had been saying for many years and still to this day will say, withdrawing from Afghanistan was the right thing to do. The president made a hard call. He did the right thing. He took a lot of heat for it. So there's no question about that, at least as far as I'm concerned. Someone who had 2 combat tours there and wrote quite a bit about it. So the getting out was the right answer. How you get out, though, is extremely important. And that's where things start to go sideways here. Because the Secretary of Defense is the guy that was in charge of that mission. Now, when he went before Congress shortly after the withdrawal had been completed, and of course it was just complete disaster, as we're going to talk about here in just a second. You may remember these famous scenes of the C-5 running down the Air Force or the runway here. People falling off and the thing went up into the air. It's just horrible the way it was done. And of course, even worse with that was the 13 Americans that were killed in the suicide bombing. Uh, so many people left behind. The Taliban were, sitting on the ramparts just watching us going. It's about as bad as it could possibly be. About a month after this, Secretary Austin goes before Congress and says, actually, I think it was pretty good.
Our soldiers, airmen, and Marines, in partnership with our allies and partners and our State Department colleagues, secured the gates, took control of airport operations, and set up a processing system for the tens of thousands of people they would be manifesting onto airplanes. They and our commanders exceeded all expectations.
Wow, that exceeded all expectations. What I just showed you, that one clip there, and other things we talked about, that exceeded all expectations. That's another one of the red flags about judgment. I mean, you can say it was the right thing to do, but you can't say it was done beyond all expectations unless your expectations were way below the curve. Then I guess it possibly could have. But then about a year and a half later, in congressional testimony again, he was asked by one of the members of Congress, do you have any regrets about any of this?
Secretary Austin, last week, General McKenzie repeated that he has many regrets about the botched, deadly, and embarrassing withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that he supports investigations into that withdrawal. A moment ago, you said you executed the president's order. You didn't tell us what you advised the president to do. But do you have regrets about the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I support the president's decision.
Do you have regrets about the withdrawal or how the withdrawal occurred from Afghanistan that cost the lives of 13 of our service members?
I don't have any regrets.
You don't have any regrets. Secretary Austin, it's very telling. Secretary Austin, has there ever been any accountability for anyone within the Department of Defense for the deadly, botched, and embarrassing withdrawal from Afghanistan? Any accountability?
Hey, listen, our troops evacuated 124,000 people off of that airfield.
Has anyone been held accountable? If a Navy captain grounded a ship, what happens immediately?
Typically, that captain is removed.
That captain is removed. Has anyone been held accountable for what happened in Afghanistan?
To my knowledge, no.
Wow. I mean, there you have Secretary of Defense actually admitting, yeah, for something administrative like a ship runs aground. Not that there was a bad mistake in a war, but the ship actually ran aground, which is an embarrassment. That captain's going to be fired right away, almost immediately. He concedes that. And then when asked to contrast that with something where Americans were actually killed, where there was disaster, many Afghans died as well. And he says, yeah, no one's been held accountable. And then what? It's just boggles the mind that even face to face with that information, we hold these people accountable who are lower in rank, but to the Secretary of Defense and the other people that were in charge of all this, not a thing there. Now, that didn't sit well with some other members of Congress. And actually, at that same hearing, one of the other members of Congress suggested this for the Secretary Austin.
Seeing how political optics was placed above the true military strategy, where we should have held Bagram Air Base, held the detention center, had a conducted withdrawal as the way it was supposed to, not shut down and entrap Americans by taking over HKI, the commercial airspace, and abandoning thousands of Americans, not to mention our SIV and the friends of those who have fought beside us proudly and honorably, who are being methodically and systematically murdered now, who trusted the American people for 20 plus years, and the increase in suicide rates of American soldiers who spiked over 25 after this failed withdrawal as a result of them feeling as if they had failed. That is why, Secretary Austin, and based on further hearings and investigations, I've already drafted my articles of impeachment for the dereliction of duty. I do feel there needs to be accountability at the top and at the highest levels.
Well, unfortunately, nothing happened with that. It didn't go anywhere. And of course, people got distracted by the Russia-Ukraine war, and then later with the Israeli-Hamas war, and all that was forgotten. But I'm not forgetting, and you shouldn't forget either. Let's go back a little bit, actually, to that other issue there about the Russia-Ukraine war. Because when Secretary Austin started out shortly at the beginning of this war, shortly after it started, he laid out in a press conference with Secretary Blinken at one point, saying, here's what our American objectives in this war are. Now, note what he doesn't say. He doesn't say it's the military defeat of Russia or that it's the military success of Ukraine, at least not in this one. He did say, though, this.
We want to see Ukraine remain a sovereign, country, a democratic country, able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine.
So he wants to see Russia weakened. That's what's in America's interest, not ending the war, not finding negotiated settlement, not taking care of it, our NATO allies, which of course we have done to a certain extent, but to prevent there from being war so that the NATO allies don't have to get engaged there. Instead of doing any of those things, he just wants Russia weakened. Now that implies that he's not interested in the war ending. He's actually okay if it continues on, because in his view, that means Russia is going to continue to be weakened. Don't forget that. That's kind of an important thing. Now, another form of judgment that was really called into question came at what he views as the end state. What's going to look like in Ukraine after this war? He was asked this past summer by Wolf Blitzer, point blank, once this war is over, what's going to happen with Ukraine and NATO? Where is that at?
So you have no doubt that after the war, Ukraine will become a member of NATO?
I have no doubt that that will happen, and we heard just about heard all the countries in the room say as much, and I think that was reassuring to President Zelensky.
Now that may have been reassuring to President Zelensky, though it shouldn't have been, because as I've been telling anyone who will listen for a long time, that this Ukraine is not going to get into NATO. They were never going to get into NATO. I've been saying that from the beginning. Everybody knows that's in NATO, they're not going to get into NATO. There's no way we would do it. It violates our own charter, which says that there has to be no external security threats and all internal disputes have to be resolved, none of which is the case. So we know they're not going to come in there. But to continue to say that is the same thing that led to this war in the beginning. You had Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, admit some number of months back that the reason why Putin attacked was not because he wanted territorial conquest or to redo the Soviet Union and all that mess that's been said otherwise, but because NATO was coming into Ukraine. He said that Putin apparently communicated to him that if that's the case, we'll go to war. And instead of saying, okay, well, that's not going to happen anyway, and finding a way out of it, like following the Minsk Accords, finding some new diplomatic means, we just said, no, we're going to do it. He's going to come in. And of course, he went to war. So now then, you're telling Putin that's still the plan. So once the war's over, we're still going to have him come into NATO, which gives Putin every reason in the world not to have a negotiated settlement, not to end the war, but to continue fighting. And by the way, the other thing that Secretary Austin said he wanted there about the beginning, to weaken Russia, early on that did happen. Russia was definitely weakened. And by about the first year mark around then, they were a lot weaker than they were when they started. But problem is, a lot of their mistakes were exposed and then burned off by the exigencies of war. Now then, they're getting stronger. Now then, their industrial output is going way up. Their development of new weapon systems is going up. Their development of electronic warfare systems against our equipment is now going up as well. So they are learning how to defeat American drones. They're learning how to defeat American artillery systems, about the HIMARS, about the Patriot systems. They're doing it under combat, folks. Guess what? That means that our national defense is weakened because of all of this. We're weakened, not Russia. Now, if you care anything about Ukraine, you should say, hey, this war needs to come to an end quickly. Let's don't continue it on and continue to support Ukraine and to give them everything that they're asking for, although we're not even doing that. We're giving them some of the things they asked for. Then this war needs to come to an end. So every way you want to look at this, the Secretary of Defense, the man who is tapped to lead our country's armed forces, that's supposed to advise the president on the right way to go and make sure that all of our armed forces are as strong as they can be for our national security, continues to show terrible judgment. He continues to lead us in places that are seeing our enemies get stronger, are seeing our capabilities dwindle because we've given away thousands of our military vehicles, millions of rounds of our artillery shells, hundreds of thousands of missiles of other kinds, our best anti-aircraft systems, all of these things. We're weaker. You understand that? This is making us weaker. I get it. Nobody wants Russia to win. But at some point, we have to get to the place to where we recognize, listen, our national security cannot be diminished while we try to do the militarily unattainable thing of helping Ukraine to win a war it's not going to win. And I can graphically tell you that, and we're probably going to hit that next week in a new deep dive where we're going to detail why that is, why it's almost physically impossible for that to happen. But even in the attempt, it's costing us, folks. It is costing us, and we need to get this fixed. And I hope that President Biden doesn't do what Kirby said there at the beginning, that no, we're going to do nothing. We're not going to change anything. And the great leadership he's shown is going to continue. Listen, as a human being, I wish Secretary Austin well. I hope whatever he was in the hospital for, he gets recovered for and gets back to full strength. I hope that he does that. Genuine, heartfelt, I do. But for the good of America, for our country, the guy that works in that building behind me needs to do something different. We need to see some leadership from him that says, hey, that's too many red flags. We got to get somebody that's going to do a little bit better job for our country. And that's where we're at. And that's what I think you need to know. We're going to be unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, even from right here in front of the White House. Thanks for joining us today. Remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.